The moment he said, "Why are you always sorry?" something inside me went completely still, and for the first time in my life, I didn't answer. It wasn't a fight. That's what made it dangerous. We were standing in the kitchen, the overhead light too bright for the late hour, the smell of burnt coffee still hanging in the air. He had just finished blaming me for a mistake he made at work, some missed deadline, some email he forgot to send. I already knew the script. I was supposed to sigh, lower my voice, and say the word that had lived on my tongue for years. Sorry. Sorry for asking questions. Sorry for noticing his moods. Sorry for existing in a way that required care. But this time, my mouth didn't move. He stared at me like I'd spoken out of turn, even though I hadn't spoken at all. His eyebrows pulled together slowly, confusion mixing with irritation. "Well," he asked, "aren't you going to say anything?" I looked at him, really looked at him, the man I'd spent years adjusting myself around, the man who could turn his failures into my responsibility without raising his voice, the man who taught me, gently at first, that peace came from my silence. And I realized something terrifying. Every apology I had ever given him had been unearned. "I didn't do this," I said quietly. The words sounded foreign, heavy, like they didn't belong to the woman he thought I was. His laugh came quick and sharp. "Here we go. You're always so sensitive." Normally, that would have been my cue to soften, to explain, to apologize for being emotional. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle into my chest. Not anger, not rage, clarity. I thought about all the times I'd apologized just to end a conversation, all the times I'd said sorry for crying after he dismissed me, for asking where he'd been, for noticing lipstick on a grass that wasn't mine, for needing reassurance he never planned to give. I had mistaken endurance for love. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I turned off the light instead. The room dimmed, shadows stretching across the walls, and in that quiet, I finally understood how loud my shrinking had been. "I'm not apologizing," I said. His smile faded. "What?" I said, "I'm not apologizing." The air shifted, he straightened, crossed his arms, did that thing where he made himself bigger without moving an inch. "So now you're blaming me?" "I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just not taking blame for something I didn't do." That's when I saw it. Not anger, fear. Because my silence wasn't submission, and he didn't know what to do with a woman who stopped explaining herself. "You're acting different," he said slowly. "What's going on with you?" I almost laughed. For years, I'd believed being kind meant being quiet, that asking questions meant causing problems, that loving someone meant making yourself smaller so they could feel bigger. But kindness without boundaries is just self-abandonment. "I'm tired," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said in a long time. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside me, and realized something else just as unsettling. He was restless. He kept shifting, sighing, checking his phone. My silence followed him into the dark, and it made him uneasy, because control doesn't come from shouting. It comes from expectation, and I had just broken it. Over the next few days, I noticed things I'd trained myself not to see before. How quickly he grew irritated when I didn't reassure him. How often he needed me to validate his version of reality. How dependent his confidence was on my self-doubt. I started writing things down, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Conversations, dates, words he later claimed he never said. I opened a savings account in my own name, reached out to friends I'd slowly drifted from, friends who reminded me who I was before I learned to apologize for breathing. He noticed. "You've been distant," he said one evening. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I thought about all the years I'd spent explaining myself to a man who never listened. "No," I said calmly. "I'm just paying attention." That's when his tone changed. "Don't start acting brand new. You know how things go when you get like this." I met his eyes, didn't flinch, didn't argue, and for the first time I understood that the most powerful thing I could do wasn't to defend myself, it was to stop volunteering for blame. Because the moment I stopped apologizing, he began unraveling, and I had no idea how far he was willing to go once he realized he was losing control. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. That should have comforted me. Instead, it unsettled me more than his anger ever had. He hummed while pouring coffee, asked if I wanted eggs, kissed my cheek like my silence the night before hadn't rearranged the air between us. This was his other tactic, the reset, the quiet erasure of moments that threatened his authority. I watched him from across the kitchen, noticing details I used to overlook. How he waited for me to smile back, how his eyes flicked to my mouth like he expected the familiar apology to arrive late, trailing behind me like it always did. It didn't. I thanked him for the coffee. Nothing more. His shoulders tensed, just slightly. "So," he said casually, "about last night." I didn't look up. "What about it?" He leaned against the counter. "You were in a mood." There it was. Not "I was wrong," not "I took my frustration out on you," just a subtle rewrite, placing responsibility gently back where he preferred it. "I wasn't in a mood," I replied. "I was quiet." He frowned. "Same thing." "No," I said calmly, "it isn't." The spoon in his hand stilled. That pause, barely a second long, told me everything. He wasn't upset about the disagreement. He was unsettled by the correction. "You're overthinking this," he said, smiling thinly. "You always do that." I met his eyes. "Do I?" He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Here we go again." I realized then how often he used humor as a weapon, not to lighten the moment, but to shrink it, to make my thoughts feel exaggerated, unnecessary, embarrassing. Normally, I would have laughed with him, smoothed things over, apologized for being too much. Instead, I finished my coffee and stood up. "I'm going to work early," I said. His smile disappeared completely. "Since when?" "Since today." The door closed behind me harder than I intended, but I didn't turn back. At work, I felt different. Not empowered yet, just alert, like someone waking up in a familiar room and realizing the furniture had been rearranged years ago without their consent. My phone buzzed around noon. Him. "Are you mad at me?" Him. "I don't like when you shut down." Him. "We should talk tonight." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering. For years, I would have rushed to reassure him, explained my feelings carefully, apologized for the discomfort my silence caused. This time, I typed one sentence. "Me. We can talk later." Nothing else. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then silence. That silence followed me home. He was waiting when I walked through the door, sitting on the couch, elbows on knees, jaw tight. The television was off. The house felt staged for confrontation. "You've been acting weird all day," he said. "I've been normal. You're just not used to it." His head snapped up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not managing your feelings for you anymore." The words landed harder than I expected. He stood up abruptly, towering the way he always did when he wanted to remind me of his presence. "So now I'm the problem?" he demanded. I took a slow breath. My heart was pounding, but my voice didn't shake. "You've always been allowed to be frustrated. I've just never been allowed to opt out of fixing it." "That's not fair," he snapped. "No, what's not fair is being blamed for things I didn't do." His face hardened. "You're changing." "Yes," I said simply. He paced the room like a caged animal. "You think you're better than me now?" "I think I'm tired of being smaller than you." That was the wrong thing to say. His voice dropped. Careful. The word hung between us, heavy with history. It was the same tone he used whenever I stepped too close to the edge of myself. Not a threat, something worse, a reminder of consequences I'd learned to anticipate without being told. Normally, that word would have sent me retreating. Instead, I felt something click into place. "I am being careful," I said, "with myself." He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "You're not like this," he said slowly. "You don't do confrontation." "I'm not confronting you, I'm standing." That night, he didn't sleep beside me. He stayed on the couch, phone glowing in the dark, pretending not to watch every move I made when I walked past. And for the first time since I stopped apologizing, I felt it clearly. My silence wasn't just unnerving him, it was threatening the entire system he'd built around my compliance. The next morning, I found something missing, small, almost unnoticeable to anyone else, but I noticed. A document folder I kept in the desk drawer. Gone. I stood there, staring at the empty space, a chill creeping up my spine, because I hadn't told him I'd started documenting anything, which meant one of two things. Either he'd gone searching, or he'd already known exactly where to look. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom longer than I meant to, staring at the open desk drawer like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. The folder had been thin, nothing dramatic, just notes, dates, small fragments of truth I'd begun gathering quietly. But its absence felt loud, violating. I replayed the last few weeks in my mind, the nights I stayed up late writing, the mornings I slid the folder back into place before work. The way he'd started lingering in the bedroom lately, asking casual questions, watching me from mirrors and reflections like he was piecing something together. I hadn't imagined it. He knew. When he came home that evening, I didn't ask about the folder right away. I watched him instead. Watched how he hung his jacket with exaggerated calm, how he avoided the bedroom, how he waited for me to speak first. "You're quiet," he said finally, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "So are you." He smiled thinly. "I'm just tired." I nodded. "Me too." The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. This wasn't the kind of quiet I used to keep, the apologetic kind. This was deliberate, grounded. He leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said, "when you get like this, it worries me." I looked up. "Like what?" "Withdrawn," he replied. "Secretive." The word hit its mark, carefully chosen, accusatory without sounding aggressive. "I'm allowed to have thoughts that don't belong to you," I said evenly. He exhaled through his nose. "See, this is what I mean. You're being defensive." "No," I replied. "I'm being observant." His eyes narrowed. "What are you observing exactly?" I held his gaze. Patterns. For a split second, something dark flashed across his face, too fast to be intentional. Then it was gone, replaced with practiced concern. "You've been under a lot of stress lately. Grief does strange things to people." I almost laughed. There it was again, his favorite move, reframing my clarity as instability, my boundaries as symptoms, my growth as damage. I'm not grieving, I said. I'm waking up. He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You're acting like I'm the enemy. I'm acting like I trust myself, I replied. He paced the kitchen, running a hand through his hair. I found something today, he said suddenly. My chest tightened, but I didn't react. What did you find? He said notes, about me, about our marriage. There it was. I kept my voice steady. And? He turned to face me. Why are you writing things down like I'm some kind of threat? I considered him carefully. Why did you feel the need to look through my things? He scoffed. This is my house, too. Yes, but my thoughts are not communal property. His jaw clenched. You didn't answer my question. I was writing because my memory kept getting questioned, because conversations kept changing after the fact, because I kept apologizing for things I couldn't remember doing wrong. That's insane, he snapped. So now you're accusing me of gaslighting you? I stood up slowly. I'm describing my experience. That's the same thing. No, I said calmly, it's not. His eyes narrowed. What are you observing exactly? I held his gaze. Patterns. For a split second, something dark flashed across his face, too fast to be intentional. Then it was gone, replaced with practiced concern. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Grief does strange things to people. I almost laughed. There it was again, his favorite move, reframing my clarity as instability, my boundaries as symptoms, my growth as damage. I'm not grieving, I said. I'm waking up. He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You're acting like I'm the enemy. I'm acting like I trust myself, I replied. He paced the kitchen, running a hand through his hair. I found something today, he said suddenly. My chest tightened, but I didn't react. What did you find? He said notes, about me, about our marriage. There it was. I kept my voice steady. And? He turned to face me. Why are you writing things down like I'm some kind of threat? I considered him carefully. Why did you feel the need to look through my things? He scoffed. This is my house, too. Yes, but my thoughts are not communal property. His jaw clenched. You didn't answer my question. I was writing because my memory kept getting questioned, because conversations kept changing after the fact, because I kept apologizing for things I couldn't remember doing wrong. That's insane, he snapped. So now you're accusing me of gaslighting you? I stood up slowly. I'm describing my experience. That's the same thing. No, I said calmly, it's not. His eyes narrowed. What are you observing exactly? I held his gaze. Patterns. For a split second, something dark flashed across his face, too fast to be intentional. Then it was gone, replaced with practiced concern. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Grief does strange things to people. I almost laughed. There it was again, his favorite move, reframing my clarity as instability, my boundaries as symptoms, my growth as damage. I'm not grieving, I said. I'm waking up. He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You're acting like I'm the enemy. I'm acting like I trust myself, I replied. He paced the kitchen, running a hand through his hair. I found something today, he said suddenly. My chest tightened, but I didn't react. What did you find? He said notes, about me, about our marriage. There it was. I kept my voice steady. And? He turned to face me. Why are you writing things down like I'm some kind of threat? I considered him carefully. Why did you feel the need to look through my things? He scoffed. This is my house, too. Yes, but my thoughts are not communal property. His jaw clenched. You didn't answer my question. I was writing because my memory kept getting questioned, because conversations kept changing after the fact, because I kept apologizing for things I couldn't remember doing wrong. That's insane, he snapped. So now you're accusing me of gaslighting you? I stood up slowly. I'm describing my experience.
That's the same thing. No, I said calmly, it's not. His eyes narrowed. What are you observing exactly? I held his gaze. Patterns. For a split second, something dark flashed across his face, too fast to be intentional. Then it was gone, replaced with practiced concern. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Grief does strange things to people. I almost laughed. There it was again, his favorite move, reframing my clarity as instability, my boundaries as symptoms, my growth as damage. I'm not grieving, I said. I'm waking up. He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You're acting like I'm the enemy. I'm acting like I trust myself, I replied. He paced the kitchen, running a hand through his hair. I found something today, he said suddenly. My chest tightened, but I didn't react. What did you find? He said notes, about me, about our marriage. There it was. I kept my voice steady. And? He turned to face me. Why are you writing things down like I'm some kind of threat? I considered him carefully. Why did you feel the need to look through my things? He scoffed. This is my house, too. Yes, but my thoughts are not communal property. His jaw clenched. You didn't answer my question. I was writing because my memory kept getting questioned, because conversations kept changing after the fact, because I kept apologizing for things I couldn't remember doing wrong. That's insane, he snapped. So now you're accusing me of gaslighting you? I stood up slowly. I'm describing my experience. That's the same thing. No, I said calmly, it's not. His eyes narrowed. What are you observing exactly? I held his gaze. Patterns. For a split second, something dark flashed across his face, too fast to be intentional. Then it was gone, replaced with practiced concern. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Grief does strange things to people. I almost laughed. There it was again, his favorite move, reframing my clarity as instability, my boundaries as symptoms, my growth as damage. I'm not grieving, I said. I'm waking up. He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. You're acting like I'm the enemy. I'm acting like I trust myself, I replied. He paced the kitchen, running a hand through his hair. I found something today, he said suddenly. My chest tightened, but I didn't react. What did you find? He said notes, about me, about our marriage. There it was. I kept my voice steady. And? He turned to face me. Why are you writing things down like I'm some kind of threat? I considered him carefully. Why did you feel the need to look through my things? He scoffed. This is my house, too. Yes, but my thoughts are not communal property. His jaw clenched. You didn't answer my question.
I was writing because my memory kept getting questioned, I replied, because conversations kept changing after the fact, because I kept apologizing for things I couldn't remember doing wrong. That's insane, he snapped. So now you're accusing me of gaslighting you? I stood up slowly. I'm describing my experience. That's the same thing. No, I said calmly, it's not. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You know how this looks, right? Writing things down, keeping secrets, it makes you look unstable. I felt my hands tremble, but not with fear, with anger I'd swallowed for years. What makes someone unstable, I said quietly, is being told their reality is wrong long enough that they stop trusting it. He stared at me, breathing hard. You're trying to make me the bad guy. I'm trying to stop making myself the bad one, I replied. That's when his tone changed completely. Soft, almost tender. You don't have to do this alone, he said. We can fix this. You just need to stop shutting me out. The old version of me would have folded right there, apologized, handed the power back willingly just to restore calm. Instead, I asked a single question. Why did you take the folder? He hesitated, just long enough. I was worried about you, he said. That was the answer of a man who'd rehearsed. I nodded slowly. Then you should be worried now. His eyes widened slightly. What does that mean? It means, I said, that if you felt entitled to my private thoughts, then I need to be even more careful about protecting myself. You're being dramatic, he snapped. No, I replied. I'm being strategic. That word did it. He turned away abruptly, muttering under his breath, You think you're so smart now. I didn't respond. That night, I locked my phone, changed passwords, opened a new email account, moved my savings. I didn't do it out of panic, but out of clarity, the kind that comes when you realize the person you've been managing emotionally is now threatened by your independence. He slept soundly. I didn't. At 2:17 a.m., I felt the bed shift. He sat up quietly, trying not to wake me. I kept my breathing slow, even. I watched him through barely opened eyes as he reached for my phone on the nightstand. And in that moment, I understood something chilling. My silence hadn't just unsettled him, it had activated him. Because men who rely on control don't fear confrontation, they fear losing access, and I had just become inaccessible. The next morning, my phone was back where I'd left it, untouched, or so it seemed. But when I checked my email, there was a login alert. Unrecognized device, unrecognized location. My heart didn't race. It hardened, because now it was clear. This was no longer just about a marriage breaking down. It was about a man who could not stand a woman who stopped apologizing. And I had a feeling he was about to show me just how far he was willing to go to get that power back. I didn't confront him about the login alert right away, not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood the game. For years, I had lived in reaction mode, explaining myself, defending my intentions, apologizing just to keep the emotional temperature low. Every response I gave him taught him how to push me next. And now, with my silence and boundaries disrupting the rhythm he depended on, he was scrambling to regain access. So I watched. That morning, he was unusually pleasant, too pleasant. He offered to make breakfast again, asked about my day before I'd even put my shoes on, complimented my hair, my outfit, my energy. It was jarring. This was the version of him that used kindness strategically, the one who appeared whenever control slipped too far, the version that made me doubt myself in the past, made me wonder if I'd imagined the tension, made me apologize for misunderstanding him. I smiled politely, said thank you, gave him nothing else. His eyes searched my face the entire time. At work, I opened a brand new notebook, one that never left my bag, and wrote everything down. The missing folder, the phone, the login alert, his sudden shift in behavior. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't speculate. I documented. Because when you've been gaslit long enough, facts become anchors. By the time I got home that evening, he was waiting again, this time with takeout, candles, music playing softly in the background. I thought we could reset, he said. We've been disconnected. Disconnected, another word he loved. It implied shared responsibility, mutual failure. I set my bag down slowly. What does reset mean to you? He hesitated. It means getting back to normal. I nodded. Normal for who? He frowned. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Interrogating everything, he snapped. You're turning simple conversations into problems. I met his gaze. I'm asking questions. And that's the problem, he said sharply. You never used to question me like this. There it was. Not, we're hurting. Not, I miss you. You never used to question me. I felt something settle into place, like the final piece of a puzzle I'd been working on unconsciously for years. I used to apologize instead, I said calmly. That worked better for you. His face darkened. So now you're punishing me? I'm protecting myself. He laughed bitterly. From what, me? I didn't answer. That silence hit him harder than any accusation. You don't notice what you're doing, he said. You're pulling away, keeping secrets, acting like you're planning an exit. I took a slow breath. Why does that scare you? His jaw clenched. Because that's what people do when they're done. The truth slipped out before he could stop it. I'm allowed to be done, I said quietly, especially with being blamed for your behavior. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. I never blamed you for everything. I didn't raise my voice. I blamed you enough that I started believing it. He paced the room, running his hair through his hair, frustration radiating off him. You're rewriting history. No, I replied. I'm remembering it without apologizing. That night he slept in the bed again, but his body was rigid, turned away from me. I stared at the ceiling, heart steady, mind clear. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was aware. The next few days followed the same pattern: charm, irritation, guilt, concern, then charm again. He oscillated between needing reassurance and resenting me for not providing it. I stayed consistent. No arguing, no explaining, no apologizing. I moved my important documents to a secure location outside the house, set up two-factor authentication on everything, opened a separate checking account, and rerouted part of my paycheck, reconnected with friends, carefully, quietly. He noticed all of it. You don't need separate accounts, he said one night. That feels extreme. What feels extreme is feeling unsafe being financially dependent. He stared at me. So now I make you feel unsafe? I met his eyes. Your reaction to my independence does. That was the moment I knew. This marriage wasn't breaking because I'd changed. It was breaking because I'd stopped compensating for his need to control the narrative. The final straw didn't come with yelling or accusations. It came on a Tuesday night, ordinary and quiet. He looked at me across the room and said, "You've really changed. I don't even recognize you anymore." And for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fix that. I recognize myself, I said. His face fell, not in sadness, but in realization, because that was the truth he couldn't survive. The woman who apologized for existing was gone, and the woman standing in her place was no longer negotiable. That night I packed a bag, not in secret, not in panic, just enough to leave. I didn't slam doors, I didn't explain. I paused at the doorway and looked back at him one last time. I hope you find someone who apologizes the way you need, but it won't be me. He didn't follow me. He didn't stop me. He just stared, stunned, silent, and finally powerless. As I stepped into the night air, something inside me loosened for the first time in years. But I also knew this wasn't over, because men who lose control quietly often try to reclaim it later, louder, meaner, and more desperate than before. And I had a feeling my refusal to apologize was about to cost him far more than he was ready to lose.
I didn't feel triumphant when I left. That surprised me. I thought there would be relief so sharp it felt like joy, or fear loud enough to drown everything else out. Instead, what settled over me was something quieter, clarity. The kind that doesn't rush or shake, the kind that sits with you and says, "You're not wrong, you're just done." I drove to my sister's place with the radio off, my thoughts steady, my hands calm on the wheel, no dramatic music playing in my head, no replaying the argument, because there hadn't really been one. That was the point. When someone is used to your apologies, your silence becomes an act of defiance. The first night away, I slept deeper than I had in years. No listening for footsteps, no bracing myself for tone shifts, no rehearsing explanations in my head before I even woke up. In the morning, my phone was full. Missed calls, messages stacked one after another. Him, where are you? Him, this is childish. Him, you can't just leave without talking. Him, you're blowing this out of proportion. Him, I'm worried about you. That last one almost made me laugh. Concern had always been his favorite disguise. I didn't respond. Instead, I made coffee, sat at the table, watched the sun creep through the blinds. For the first time in a long time, my nervous system wasn't in a constant state of negotiation. By noon, the tone of his messages shifted. Him, I'm sorry if I said something wrong. Him, we both messed up. Him, let's not throw everything away over nothing. Nothing. Years of apologizing for existing had finally been reduced to nothing. That afternoon, I went to the bank and finalized what I'd already started. Separate accounts, updated beneficiaries, a quiet but irreversible disentangling. The teller smiled at me kindly, unaware she was witnessing something sacred. Independence doesn't announce itself, it finalizes itself. By the third day, the anger arrived. Him, you're making me look bad. Him, people are asking questions. Him, you think you're some kind of victim now? I felt it then, the old pull, the reflex to explain, to soften, to apologize for his discomfort. I didn't, because I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. When you stop apologizing, people who benefited from your guilt start accusing you of cruelty. I blocked his number that night, not out of spite, out of necessity. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was spacious. I filled it with things I hadn't allowed myself to want before, walks without checking my phone, dinners with friends I'd slowly been isolated from, laughter that didn't require permission. Still, I documented everything, screenshots, dates, messages, because even in my peace, I stayed prepared. A week later, I received an email from his work address. Professional, controlled, cold. We need to discuss logistics. You're being unreasonable. This isn't how adults handle conflict. I read it once, then forwarded it to a new folder labeled Boundaries, because adults don't require access to you in order to respect your no. That evening, my sister sat beside me on the couch and said something that cracked something open in me. You know, she said gently, we've been waiting for you to stop apologizing for a long time. I swallowed hard. I hadn't realized how many people had seen me shrinking while I convinced myself it was love. Later that night, alone in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling and felt the grief finally arrive, not for the marriage, but for the woman I had been inside it, the one who thought peace was earned through self-erasure. I let myself cry then, not because I missed him, but because I finally understood how much of myself I'd given away trying to be easy to love. And as the tears dried, something else replaced them, resolute. Because leaving wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part would be staying gone when he realized guilt no longer worked and decided to escalate. And I knew, deep down, that day was coming. The escalation didn't come the way I expected. There were no angry voicemails from unknown numbers, no surprise visits, no dramatic pleas. Instead, it arrived dressed as reason, wrapped in language that sounded mature and fair, almost convincing if you didn't know how to listen for the trap. It started with a mutual friend. She called me one afternoon, her voice hesitant, careful. I ran into him yesterday, she said. He seems really broken up. I stayed quiet. He said he doesn't understand what happened, she continued, that you just shut down and disappeared. I'm not saying he's right,
maybe he deserves a conversation? There it was, the first attempt to outsource access. I didn't disappear, I said calmly. I left. Well, yes, she replied quickly, but from his perspective, I'm not responsible for managing his perspective anymore, I interrupted gently. She went quiet. I just don't want you to regret being so hard. Hard, another word women are taught to fear. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, staring at the wall. Not angry at her, she was just a messenger, but clear-eyed. He was doing what he always did when direct control failed. He was rewriting the story. In his version, I wasn't a woman who finally stopped apologizing. I was unstable, cold, uncommunicative, someone who left without warning. And I realized something chilling. He wasn't trying to get me back. He was trying to reclaim the narrative. The next email confirmed it. This one was longer, measured, almost sympathetic. I've been doing a lot of reflecting, he wrote. I realize now that you've been under stress, and maybe I didn't see the signs. If you're struggling emotionally, I'm willing to support you. Support? From the same man who told me I was too sensitive for years. I read the email twice, then forwarded it again to my boundaries folder, because now I saw the full arc. First, guilt, then concern, then character assassination. And if I responded, even to correct him, I would be stepping back into the role he needed me to play. The one who explains, the one who reassures, the one who apologizes for leaving. I didn't. Instead, I met with a therapist of my own, not to fix myself, but to name what had happened out loud, without minimizing it. Saying it plainly felt radical. I was conditioned to apologize for things that weren't my fault, and when I stopped, he panicked. The therapist nodded. That's because your silence removed his leverage. That word stayed with me. Leverage. A few days later, the text messages resumed, from a new number. Unknown. You really don't see how unfair you're being. Unknown. You're punishing me for trying to love you. Unknown. At least have the decency to talk. I didn't reply. I blocked the number. That night, I dreamed of myself standing in a room full of mirrors, each reflection slightly smaller than the last, and one by one they stepped forward and merged into me until there was only one woman left, whole. When I woke up, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail he'd left before I blocked the number. One final attempt. You always do this, his voice said, tight with frustration. You shut down, you make me the villain, and you walk away like you're innocent. Don't act like you didn't play a part in this. I listened to it once. Then I deleted it. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer defined me. I finally understood the truth I'd been circling for weeks. The most dangerous thing I ever did wasn't leaving. It was refusing to apologize for leaving. Because now he couldn't use my guilt as leverage. And people who lose leverage don't always retreat quietly. They look for pressure points, reputation, finances, fear. As I closed my laptop and turned off the light, I felt a familiar calm settle in. Not naive, not fragile, prepared. Because whatever he tried next wouldn't be about reconciliation, it would be about control. And this time, I wasn't going to meet it with silence alone. I was going to meet it with boundaries he couldn't cross. The pressure point he chose was reputation. I realized it the first time someone looked at me differently, just for half a second too long, before asking, "So, how are you really doing?" The question sounded caring, but there was something underneath it, a curiosity that wasn't mine.
It happened again at the grocery store. A neighbor who usually chatted about sales and recipes asked if I was taking time to heal and whether I had support. I thanked her and moved on, but the feeling followed me down the aisle like a shadow. By the end of the week, I understood. He was talking. Not loudly, not angrily, carefully. He wasn't calling me abusive or cruel. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he was painting me as fragile, overwhelmed, unstable, a woman who had just snapped under pressure. It was brilliant in the worst way, because concern spreads faster than accusation, and it's much harder to defend yourself against. I heard it through my sister first. "He called Mom," she said quietly over the phone. "He said he's worried about you, that you're not yourself." I closed my eyes. "Did he mention why I left?" I asked. She hesitated. "Not really. He just said things had been tense and that you shut down." Of course he did. In his version, my silence wasn't strength, it was pathology. I thanked her and hung up, then sat very still, letting the truth settle without panic. This was the moment I'd been preparing for without fully realizing it, the shift from private manipulation to public narrative. This was where women like me were usually pulled back in, forced to explain ourselves to everyone, to correct rumors, to perform sanity so others could feel comfortable. I wasn't going to do that. Instead, I tightened my circle. I called the friends who had known me the longest, the ones who remembered my laugh before it softened into apology. I didn't trash him. I didn't list grievances. I simply told the truth, plainly. I left because I stopped apologizing for things I didn't do, and that made him angry. The response was immediate and grounding. "Yeah," one friend said slowly, "that tracks." Another said, "I wondered when you'd finally get tired." No gasps, no disbelief, just recognition. That's when I understood something powerful. People who really know you don't need convincing. A few days later, the email came. Not from him, from his sister. "I don't know what's going on between you and my brother," she wrote, "but he's really struggling. You know how he gets when things feel out of control. Maybe you could be the bigger person and talk to him for everyone's sake." There it was again, be the bigger person, the phrase that had kept me small my entire life. I stared at the screen, heart steady, and finally allowed myself to name what was happening without softening it. He wasn't hurt, he was exposed, and exposure makes people reckless. I drafted a response, deleted it, drafted another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote one sentence. "I'm not available for conversations that question my right to leave." I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I pressed send. The reply came 10 minutes later. "Wow, I see who you really are now." I smiled sadly. They always say that when you stop performing the version of yourself they preferred. That night, I went for a walk alone. Cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clean, grounding me in my body. For years, I'd lived in my head, anticipating reactions, managing emotions, apologizing in advance. Now, every step felt like reclamation. When I got back to my sister's place, my phone was buzzing. Missed calls, unknown numbers, voicemails stacking up. I listened to one. "You think you can just rewrite the story?" His voice said, tight and controlled. "You're embarrassing yourself. People are worried about you. This is getting out of hand." I didn't finish the message. I turned the phone off. Because now I saw the full pattern clearly. When guilt failed, he used concern. When concern failed, he used community. And when community failed, I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding, not with fear, but with awareness. He wasn't trying to reach me anymore. He was trying to surround me. And that meant the next move wouldn't be whispers. It would be escalation, the kind that forces a response. As I lay down and stared into the dark, one thought settled over me with absolute certainty. If I didn't define my boundaries clearly and publicly, he'd keep defining me for everyone else. And the next move, mine or his, was going to change everything.
The escalation came disguised as concern, but this time it came with consequences. I found out on a Thursday afternoon in the most ordinary way possible. I was standing in line at the bank, scrolling through my phone, when a notification popped up from my email. Subject: urgent, verification required. At first I assumed it was spam, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was from my employer's HR department. They wanted to check in. They'd received an inquiry. Nothing formal yet, they said, just a request to confirm that I was doing well and that there were no personal matters affecting my performance. Personal matters. I stared at the screen, the noise of the bank fading into a dull hum. He hadn't accused me of anything outright. He was too careful for that. Instead, he'd planted a seed, one that made other people question my stability. I felt the old reflex rise in my chest, the urge to panic, to over-explain, to apologize preemptively. I didn't. I took a slow breath and reminded myself, clarity beats urgency. That evening, I pulled out everything I'd documented so far. Messages, emails, dates, screenshots, patterns. I laid them out on the bed like puzzle pieces and saw the picture clearly for the first time. This wasn't emotional fallout. This was strategy. He wasn't trying to get me back. He wasn't even trying to hurt me directly. He was trying to make other people step in and do the work for him. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with HR myself. Not reactive, proactive. I walked into that office calm, grounded, prepared. I didn't mention his name at first. I simply stated facts. I recently left a marriage, I said. Since then, I've experienced repeated attempts at contact and interference despite clear boundaries. I want to document that proactively so there's no confusion about my professionalism or capacity. They listened carefully. When I showed them the emails, the timestamps, the escalating pattern of third-party contact, something shifted in the room. This wasn't drama. This was documentation. By the time I left, there were no questions about my stability, only concern for me. That night, the messages intensified, from friends of friends, from people I hadn't spoken to in years. I heard you're having a rough time. He's really worried about you. Maybe you should talk to him just to clear the air. Clear the air. As if the air hadn't been perfectly clear the moment I said no. I realized then that silence alone wasn't enough anymore. Silence protects you privately, but it doesn't always protect your name. So I did something that terrified the old version of me. I spoke. Not emotionally, not defensively, clearly. I sent a brief message to a small group of people who mattered, the ones whose opinions carried weight in my life. I left my marriage because I stopped apologizing for things I didn't do. Since then, I've set boundaries that are not being respected. I'm okay, I'm safe, and I'm not available for mediation, explanations, or pressure disguised as concern. That was it. No details, no attacks, no justification. The response was immediate and telling. Some people went quiet. Others replied with simple messages of support. One wrote, "Thank you for saying this. I was starting to feel uncomfortable with what I was hearing." That's when I understood the power of truth stated calmly. It doesn't shout, it settles. That same night, I received a message from him directly for the first time in weeks. Him, "You didn't have to involve other people." Him, "This could have stayed private." Him, "You're turning this into something it doesn't need to be." I stared at the screen, heart steady. This was the moment he'd been pushing toward, the one where I was supposed to retreat.
Instead, I typed one sentence. Me. I didn't involve anyone. I responded to your involvement. Then I blocked the number. Completely. Finally. I set my phone down and felt something unfamiliar but solid take root in my chest. Finality. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the truth I'd been circling for months. He didn't fear my anger. He feared my clarity. Because clarity removes plausible deniability, it exposes patterns without naming villains. It leaves no room for misunderstandings. And now he'd lost the ability to control the narrative quietly, which meant if he tried again, it wouldn't be subtle. It would be bold. And bold mistakes are the ones that collapse everything. As I closed my eyes, one thought echoed clearly. The woman who used to apologize for existing was gone, and the man who depended on that woman was running out of moves.
The bold move came faster than I expected. 3 days after I blocked him completely, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in my chest tightened, that quiet instinct I'd learned to trust again. "This is Officer Reynolds," a calm male voice said. "I'm calling to conduct a welfare check." The word landed heavy. "I'm sorry?" I asked, already knowing. "We received a concern that you may be in emotional distress and unable to care for yourself safely." There it was, the final escalation. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't waver. That alone felt like a small victory. "I'm at work," I said evenly. "I'm safe, employed, and not in crisis." He paused. "Would you be willing to answer a few questions?" "Yes," I replied, "and I'd like this documented." That sentence changed the tone immediately. I explained, briefly, clearly, that I had left a controlling marriage, set boundaries, and experienced repeated unwanted contact and third-party interference since. I mentioned documentation, patterns, prior warnings. Silence stretched on the line. "I see," he finally said. "Thank you for clarifying." 2 hours later, I was called into my manager's office, not with concern, but with solidarity. "HR looped me in," she said gently. "You're not in trouble. We just wanted to make sure you weren't blindsided." I exhaled slowly, realizing how carefully he'd aimed that move. A welfare check wasn't an accusation, it was a suggestion, one designed to make me doubt myself, to embarrass me quietly, to reframe boundaries as instability. But this time, it backfired, because I was no longer alone in the truth. That evening, my sister sat across from me at the kitchen table, eyes wide with disbelief. "He really did that?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "because he ran out of subtlety." She shook her head slowly. "That's scary." "It would have been," I replied, "if I was still apologizing." We filed a report that night, not dramatic, not emotional, just factual. Dates, messages, third-party contact, the welfare check itself. The officer took notes quietly, nodding now and then. "You did the right thing coming in. This establishes a pattern." Pattern. That word mattered. The next morning, I woke up to an email from a lawyer, his lawyer. Formal, polite, almost detached. "My client is concerned that recent actions may escalate unnecessarily. He is requesting mediation to resolve misunderstandings and avoid further conflict." Mediation, the last refuge of men who lose control but still want access. I forwarded it to my attorney, yes, my attorney now, and waited. Her response came within the hour. "We decline. All further contact will go through me."
I stared at the screen, something warm spreading through my chest. For most of my life, I'd been the one smoothing things over. Now, I was the one being protected. That afternoon, something else happened, something small but symbolic. A mutual acquaintance I'd always felt uneasy around messaged me. "I owe you an apology," she wrote. "I repeated things I shouldn't have. I see that now." I didn't ask what she'd heard. I didn't need to, because when clarity replaces chaos, people start revisiting what they accepted without question. By the end of the week, the noise stopped. No calls, no messages, no intermediaries, not because he understood, but because the system no longer rewarded him. And that's when it hit me, late one night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The hardest part wasn't leaving, it wasn't being alone. It was learning to sit with the discomfort of not fixing things for people who never planned to change. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who apologized before anyone accused her of anything, the one who thought love meant making yourself easy to digest. I wished I could reach back in time and tell her this: your silence is not emptiness. Your boundaries are not cruelty. Your refusal to apologize is not aggression. It is self-respect catching up to the truth. As the year came to a close, I realized something else. This story wasn't ending with a dramatic confrontation or a final word spoken across a room. It was ending quietly, with a woman who no longer needed to be believed by everyone because she finally believed herself. But I also knew one last thing. Closure doesn't always come from the other person stopping. Sometimes it comes from you deciding you're done explaining. And I was more done than I'd ever been in my life.
The quiet that followed felt unnatural at first. No notifications lighting up my phone, no whispered concern filtering back through mutuals, no sudden check-ins that weren't really about me. Just space. I hadn't realized how conditioned I'd become to chaos until it disappeared. For days, I kept waiting for the next shoe to drop, some new tactic, some unexpected reach. My body stayed alert even when my mind told it I was safe. Healing, I learned, doesn't arrive as relief. It arrives as unfamiliar silence. I filled that silence intentionally. I rearranged my routines: morning walks before work, evening meals without scrolling, therapy sessions where I didn't censor myself or soften the truth. I let words like manipulation, coercion, and emotional control exist in the room without apologizing for how heavy they sounded. Naming things stripped them of their power. One afternoon, my therapist said something that settled deep in my chest. People who rely on your self-doubt feel exposed when you stop explaining yourself, she said. They don't lose you, they lose their mirror. A mirror. That's what I'd been to him, a reflective surface that softened his flaws, absorbed his mistakes, returned his image cleaned up and reassured. When I stopped doing that, he was left alone with himself, and he hated it. The first sign that things were truly shifting came from an unexpected place, his workplace. I received a call from someone I'd never spoken to before, professional, neutral. "We're conducting a routine review," the voice said. "Your name came up in relation to a personal matter. We just want to confirm there are no outstanding issues that require documentation." This time, I didn't freeze. I didn't feel defensive. "I've already documented everything with my employer and legal counsel," I replied calmly. "If you need anything further, you may contact my attorney." There was a pause. Then, "Understood. Thank you for your clarity."
When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, stunned. Clarity. For so long, my clarity had been treated like a threat. Now it was protocol. That night, I received a message from his lawyer. Short, curt. My client has been advised to cease all indirect contact. We consider this matter closed. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. Closed. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt something deeper. Grief. Not for him, but for the years I'd spent thinking strength looked like endurance, for the woman who believed peace came from compliance, for every apology I'd offered just to survive another evening without tension. I let myself mourn her properly, because she deserved compassion, not criticism. As the days passed, my nervous system began to recalibrate. Loud voices no longer made my shoulders tense. Silence no longer felt dangerous. I stopped replaying conversations in my head, searching for what I should have said differently. There was no longer a right response to anticipate. There was just me. One evening, while folding laundry, I caught myself humming. The sound surprised me. It felt intimate, unguarded. I hadn't done that in years. Small things like that started happening more often. Laughter without checking who might hear it. Decisions made without rehearsing how to justify them. Freedom didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived quietly in moments that didn't ask permission. But healing has a way of testing you one last time. A week before the year ended, I ran into him unexpectedly at a coffee shop across town, a place I used to avoid because he liked it too much. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. Our eyes met. For a split second, the old reflex surged, the instinct to soften, to smile politely, to make things easier. I didn't. I held his gaze, neutral and steady, then turned back to the counter. He stood there for a moment, clearly unsure what to do. Finally, he spoke. "You look different," he said. I nodded. "I am." There was no accusation in my voice, no edge, just truth. He waited, clearly expecting more. An apology, an explanation, an opening. None came. "I hope you're okay," he said finally. "I am." That was it. No closure speech, no final confrontation, no emotional bow tied neatly at the end. I took my coffee and walked away. Outside, the cold air hit my face, sharp and bracing. I stood there for a moment, letting it ground me, because that was the moment I knew. I didn't win by leaving. I didn't win by being believed. I won by no longer needing permission to exist without apology. But as I drove home, a quiet realization followed me long after the encounter faded. People who lose control don't always disappear. Sometimes they retreat. They wait. And the fact that he hadn't said more, hadn't tried harder, told me something wasn't finished yet. It was paused, and I had a feeling the final test of my boundaries was still coming.
The pause lasted longer than I expected. Weeks passed with no messages, no third parties, no unexpected appearances. Life began to settle into something almost gentle. I started to believe the quiet might actually hold, that maybe he'd finally accepted the reality I'd stopped apologizing for. That belief shattered on a Sunday afternoon. I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed with a notification from an unfamiliar email address. The subject line was neutral, almost polite. One last thing. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. I didn't open it right away. I made tea, sat down, grounded myself in the present before stepping back into his orbit, even digitally. That alone told me how far I'd come. When I finally opened the message, it was exactly what I expected.
measured, reflective, carefully remorseful. He wrote about accountability, about owning his part, about how time apart had given him perspective. He acknowledged mistakes, but only vaguely, only enough to sound evolved. Then came the pivot. I don't want to leave things unresolved, he wrote. After everything we shared, don't you think we owe each other a final conversation? Oh, that word again. I read the email slowly, noticing what wasn't there. No apology without conditions, no respect for the boundaries I'd stated repeatedly, no acknowledgement of the harm he'd caused by escalating outside the marriage. Just one more attempt to regain access, dressed up as maturity. For a moment, I sat with it, not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to understand why it no longer worked. I realized then that I wasn't angry. I was indifferent. And indifference is what control can't survive. I forwarded the email to my attorney, then I archived it. Not deleted, archived. Because part of my power now was refusing to erase reality just to keep the peace. That evening, my sister asked, "Do you ever wish you'd said more to him, one last time?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "Anything I would have said would have been for him, and I don't need to give him anything anymore." She nodded slowly. "That's strong." I smiled faintly. "It's peaceful." Later that night, I went for a drive. No destination, just movement. The city lights blurred past my windows as I thought about how many versions of myself I'd been in that marriage. The apologizer, the peacekeeper, the explainer, the emotional accountant, always balancing his comfort against my discomfort. I had retired all of them. At a red light, my phone buzzed again. Another email. This one shorter. "I see you're ignoring me. That tells me everything I need to know." I didn't open it fully. I didn't respond. Because now I understood the truth completely. Silence isn't powerful because it punishes someone. It's powerful because it frees you. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror and really looked at myself. Not the version he'd described to others, not the one who'd been too sensitive or hard to please, just me. A woman who had learned, slowly, painfully, that self-respect doesn't require permission, explanation, or apology. I slept deeply that night, and when I woke up the next morning, it was the last day of the year. I stood at the window watching the sunrise, feeling something unfamiliar but steady in my chest. Completion. Because the final test of my boundaries hadn't been dramatic. It had been simple. Would I re-engage just to make him comfortable, or would I trust that no response was finally my answer? I chose myself. And for the first time, I didn't wonder if that choice would cost me something. I knew exactly what it gave me. But as the sun rose higher, painting the sky in soft gold, I felt a strange certainty settle in. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of a version of me that no longer existed. And tomorrow, when the year turned, I would step fully into a life that didn't require apology to be lived.
The new year arrived quietly. No fireworks outside my window, no dramatic countdown, just the soft hum of the city waking up and the sound of my own breathing, steady, unguarded, mine. I used to think endings needed witnesses, closure speeches, final conversations where everything was said just right. But standing there in the early morning light, I understood something that would have changed my life years ago. The most honest endings happen without an audience. I made coffee and sat at the table, the same place where I once apologized for things I didn't do. I thought about the woman I had been, how she measured her worth by how little space she took up, how quickly she could smooth things over, how well she could disappear inside someone else's comfort. I felt tenderness for her, not shame. She survived the only way she knew how, but she wasn't needed anymore. In the weeks that followed, life didn't suddenly become perfect. Healing didn't erase memory or pain. It reorganized them. I still had moments where old instincts surfaced, moments where I wanted to explain myself, moments where silence felt unfamiliar instead of safe. But every time that happened, I reminded myself of the truth I'd earned the hard way. I don't owe clarity to people who benefited from my confusion. I don't owe access to people who misused it. And I don't owe apologies for boundaries that protect me. My life slowly expanded in ways that felt almost miraculous because they were so ordinary. Mornings without anxiety, conversations without rehearsals, decisions made without imagining how someone else might react. Peace, I learned, isn't loud, it's consistent. Months later, I heard through mutuals that he was still confused, still telling his version, still trying to understand how someone like me, quiet, accommodating, endlessly forgiving, had walked away without a final word. That used to bother me. Now, it didn't. Because the truth doesn't chase validation, it doesn't argue with misunderstanding, it doesn't demand to be believed by everyone in the room. It simply exists. I didn't leave my marriage in anger. I left it in awareness. I didn't win by proving him wrong. I won by no longer needing him to be wrong for me to be right. The woman who once apologized for breathing learned how to inhale fully and exhale without guilt. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of yourself, if you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too quiet, or too much the moment you stop apologizing, please hear me when I say this. Your silence is not weakness, your boundaries are not cruelty, and choosing yourself is not selfish, it's survival. You don't need a dramatic exit to reclaim your life. Sometimes all it takes is deciding you're done saying sorry for existing. If you learned something new from my life story, please like this video, subscribe to join our community for more stories like mine, and comment down below where you're watching this video from. I truly love to know.